Welcome to High End Homes Handled Right. This is the Real Property Management Luxury Podcast, hosted by yours truly, Lindell Johnson. Today, we have a special guest, Miss Karalynn Cromeens, published author, award-winning lawyer, leader, seasoned manager, and a partner of Cromeens Law Firm. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming. Man, that was, reading that off, that's a lot for one person to be able to do. That's a lot. So,
one bite at a time.
One bite at a time. Well, tell me, how did you get to this point?
Oh, let's see. How far back do you want to go? No. So, I think really, because I'm in construction law, and I think, so when I grew up, I was working, my family was in construction. I was always around it. I never really thought about going into construction. I worked for, my uncle's family construction business. He owned an underground sprinkler company, did that, left and went to college, and then went to law school. And in my last year of law school, my husband and I started a material supply company called Moral Masonry. And I very quickly learned that, number one, starting a business from the ground up is really hard. But then the second part of that is that there's so much, at least in the construction industry, like lien waivers, lien releases, collection issues so I first got out of law school and went to work for my real estate professor for about a year and a half. Okay. And then very quickly, our business needed us, so I started my own firm, the Cromeens Law Firm, and did our work, our collection works, all our liens and all of that stuff, and learned how to do that. And then as I would collect money or do things, that people are like, oh, can you do that for me? And, I never really thought about it. I was just doing what I needed to do. And so then it kind of expanded from there. And I started doing collection work and lien and construction. And I guess the most thing is that I could relate to the clients because I had been there. And so I could speak the language of a small business and a small construction business and feeling their pain points of not getting paid. And so then it could just kind of developed from there. The firm was founded in 2006. So since then, we've kind of grown and, become a way better business than I was initially. They don't teach you how to run a business in law school.
Where did you go to law school?
I went to South Texas, down in Houston.
Nice,
downtown.
Nice. So you're local here in
Houston. Yes, I'm originally from Illinois, but I moved here in 2001. So I've been here for quite a long time. Yeah, and that's when I started South Texas.
So now you've had this successful. You're a successful attorney and you're doing well. At what point did you say, okay, now let me do something else? Let me add to this bucket of things that I'm doing. So
the book was really kind of, my first book was called Quit Getting Screwed, and it was really kind of the situation where it's not that I wanted to write a book, but I wanted education out there for contractors, because in the commercial construction industry, like the subcontractors that do most of the work, the plumbers, electricians, the AC guys, go into the commercial construction project just wanting to work. Well, part of that is they have to sign a contract.
Right.
And these contracts that they sign with general contractors are very much one-sided, and they don't realize the risk that they're taking when they sign those contracts. Like there's, I think probably the worst provision in a subcontract is what's called a pay when paid clause. So the subcontractor that's doing the work could do a great job, do it perfectly, but he's still not entitled to be paid until the owner pays the general contractor.
I've heard that.
And which is, as a sub, you have to be willing and able to cash flow the entire project without getting paid. Because if something goes wrong with the owner and the general, you don't have the right to stop working.
Right.
And so I took clients through these arguments and things that as a normal person you would think that's so unfair. You can just, fire me for no reason, or you don't have to pay me because you weren't paid.
After they've put all that work,
into
material and energy, all that into
and so I was really mad. Right. I had took a client to trial, and he did a good job, but it had a pay when paid clause. He didn't realize what that meant. And we didn't know until we got into it that honestly, the general contractor hadn't been paid. So even though he was working for 120 days and not been paid, technically under his contract, he wasn't entitled to be paid. So I was mad that my contractor lost, and not because he was a bad contractor, but because he didn't understand his contract. And no one was saying anything.
Wow.
And so like, why is nobody saying anything about it? This is the backbone of America out there building things.
Absolutely.
That is risking their business to go to work.
So this happens often.
All the time.
So would you recommend before a contractor signs to hire an attorney like yourself?
Absolutely. And somebody just to review it and negotiate where we can, right? Because these things have kind of become the standard. But the main thing I wanted them to know is when they sign these things, what they really meant, the risk that they were really taking. So, okay, yes, I'm gonna take this risk, but I know going in what I'm evaluating and the risk that I'm taking as a business owner.
Right. So you're saving lives.
Yeah, I hope. Well, I'm saving, but yeah.
Well, yeah. Because, I mean, if someone's fronting all their time, their energy, materials, and they're paying for the materials up front, correct?
Sometimes they're sold on credit, but all their guys, all their laborers, I could have to pay for all of that and not get paid. And it's a dangerous situation to be in if you're not prepared.
Right. So what kind of feedback do you receive from, the book and the podcast talking about these things? I mean, are you getting a lot of feedback on it?
Yeah, I mean, people say it's helpful all the time. And, contractors tell me all the time how they were able to successfully negotiate a part of their contract because they could understand what it meant.
Yeah.
And so, that's the biggest reward for me is that it wasn't about book sales. It wasn't about any of that. It was, I want to help because nobody else is doing it. It's like, hello, a lifeline for somebody that even if they couldn't afford an attorney, they could go buy the book on Amazon or, I have Subcontractor Institute, which I started at the same time, where I teach the classes on the book for free because it was that important to me that they understand. Because, I mean, we're talking about small family businesses that if they go under, not only will their family suffer, but all the families that work for them.
Everyone that goes along with it all at once. Yeah. All at once. Interesting. So now, you've got the book is successful. You have the podcast. Matter of fact, I think I told you earlier, I actually listened to the podcast. There was one specifically about not wasting your time.
Yes.
Right. So I really dug into that one. So now that you've got the podcast, what's next?
Actually, I'm working on my third book. It's called Trust Your Gut, and it's one for residential contractors.
Oh, speak on that. So
in residential construction, it's way different than commercial. So a residential contractor usually comes to the table with their client with a contract, right? And a lot of the contractors obviously get into business because they're good at what they do. They don't know the business side or what should be in a contract, and sometimes they don't even have one, which is a recipe for disaster for both parties, right? And so my book is all about the things you should put in residential contracts to keep your clients happy and to cover CYA, cover your ass.
Right.
Because honestly, the real purpose of a contract is to manage expectations. In order to do that, clearly, both parties should read and understand it. And that's especially important in residential construction because you're dealing with somebody's home. Whether they live in it or whether they're building it, it's very personal. And so anything that goes wrong is very personal.
Right.
Which is understandable. And so trying to teach them how to walk their clients through the process so they don't end up in litigation.
Got it. So communication is key.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, if someone wants to get into that business but is just afraid, what advice would you give them? Because there are some people that, although they do the due diligence and, they feel like, I have the funds to be able to do this. This could be, the business that I'm going to do now, my small business. I'm about to start this up. But there's that fear of something going wrong legally. What would you tell them?
Okay, so there's some basics that if you're going to go into, there's a set of basics that I would get for anybody in construction is, number one, you have to incorporate. And whether that's an LLC or an Inc. or whatever. And the reason for that is if you just go out to business and say, Karalynn Cromeens, I'm going to come remodel your kitchen, you're opening up your personal assets to liability. And so when you incorporate like an Inc. or an LLC, you limit that liability to the assets of the company.
Okay.
Right. And so that's like your first layer of protection. If things go wrong, the company go to bankruptcy, whatever, but it's not going to affect you personally. Or if, you accidentally burn a house down or something like that, it's the company. So,
okay.
You know what I'm saying? So that's the first level of protection. In Texas, it's with the Secretary of State. Most other states, it's with the Secretary of State as well. It doesn't cost that much to incorporate. a DBA that you file with the county clerk is not incorporating. That's no different than just you being an individual.
I'll just name something else.
Yeah, exactly. So you go to because you can file an assumed name with the county clerk's record.
Right.
But it doesn't protect you.
There's no protection at all. You're still going out there, waiting for any lawsuit to hit you.
Exactly. And so that's number one. Number two is a GL policy, which is general liability, right? Getting a general liability policy from a insurance company that is familiar with construction. They are out there. This is not the same person you get your auto insurance from or your home insurance. Right. It's more of a commercial company. It's usually not that expensive, especially if you're just getting started. But in the case that you accidentally miswire something and burn somebody's house down, that would cover that.
Okay.
So the GL is for accidents or things that might happen, right?
Got it.
So if you don't have any employees right off the bat, those are the two main things. I think the next important thing is the contract with your customer. And because if you want to be a successful contractor, you have to manage a homeowner's expectations. And a homeowner's coming to the project with their own set of expectations. They've watched HGTV. They heard what their cousin said. And so it's not really in reality. But if you don't take the time to say, hey, this is really how it's going to go, you're judged against those standards. And you don't even know it.
Against their own standards that are in their own mind.
Correct. And so having a meeting of the minds of, this permitting process could take 6 months or, just being reasonable and telling them, and don't overpromise, like saying a project will be done when you know it won't. That only leads to trouble, I promise you.
and slower growth of your business.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And pissed off clients and bad reviews.
I believe it. What about, owners that they're not building, they're not going to build a home. They already have a home. They're accidental investors, right? So meaning there was a couple that had a home, and each one of them had their own home. Now they're going to get married, and they want to lease a second home. Have you seen any issues with that? And the second question to that is, with that home that they're going to lease, what are some things that they would have to think about before they're doing that?
Okay, so a couple of things. I mean, I think the most important thing with leasing is taking the time to find a good tenant, right? Maybe going to a service that can do a background check or, getting to know them, talking with them, feeling if they've rented before, getting some kind of history on their renter's history, just getting to know them. Because I think that if you have a good tenant, a lease is easy, right? If you have a terrible tenant, it's not so easy.
Right.
Right. And some of the things you're going to want to think about when you're making that transition is, number one, you can't have two homesteads in Texas. So wherever you live will be your homestead, and the other one, the homestead exemption, will have to come off. And here's the other thing. If the taxing authority doesn't catch it right away, they can go back 3 years and assess taxes. So it's better just to be like, when the homestead exemption's not there anymore, to let them know that it's not
there right away.
So that and the taxes are going to go up most likely, but you can only have one. And if you don't do it, and don't be wrong, I guess you could get away with it for a while. And if they found out, they're going to come back and charge you at least the last 3 years of taxes. I would also if you have homeowners insurance let them know and see if they'll still cover it. Sometimes, like if you had homeowners insurance as an individual, they may or may not cover a tenant, but you need to let them know, right?
And with that insurance, it's not just the building, but it's the tenant that's living there.
Correct. So usually, like the owner's insurance is going to cover the building, the house.
Right.
So you can encourage your tenant to get renter's insurance. That just covers contents, though. Mm-hmm. So any damage to the actual property will always go back on the owner's policy.
Got it.
So and even if the house is paid off, I still recommend having insurance. Right.
Absolutely.
Also, in Houston, is quite an issue. If you have flood insurance, which a lot of places do, if you take off that homestead exemption, you're not living there anymore, those rates will skyrocket. Like I had a property that we owned and we lived in. It was still expensive at like $2,000 a year. We started renting it out and went to $5,200 a year. So we're talking about a substantial increase if you want to keep the flood insurance on it.
Interesting. So now you've increased your taxes. Insurance has increased. So now that's going to be a push for your rent to be increased as well in order to capture that. But if it's a cap on that market, where are you going to go?
Exactly.
So what I'm getting at is most likely they're going to just have to do their due diligence, find out, what that rate is, and then think about the things that you're talking about, that there's good, maybe a tax increase, insurance may go up, and they just doing those things and thinking about those numbers, then, you can make a better decision.
Yeah, because I mean, on residential property, there's a lot, especially when it comes to upkeep, and that's the other thing too. Usually, in my experience with a lease, we put like repairs are paid the first $100 by the tenant, or the first $200, and the reason for that is that they're not going to call you unless it's a real issue, right? Because they have to pay the first $200. And so, because those people that are repeatedly calling with the same thing and it's not really an issue.
Right.
And so that kind of deters that a little bit. But just having, and being clear about who's responsible for what, right? Are you responsible for the hot water heater, AC? What are they responsible? What are you responsible for? Kind of putting that out there. And then thinking about all those expenses when you're trying to see how much you're going to charge, right? It's not you're not just getting rent. There's still an expense
right. There's
side.
an expense that you have to think about. And unfortunately, there's some tenants that are renters that just don't realize
exactly.
that.
And they might not feel it unless if they ever looked at like what you put in and what came out of it,
right.
If you're actually making money on it or not.
There's been a lot of, property management companies that are managing it for, the investors. And there's been pushback recently in regards to additional insured. And the homeowner not understanding what that is. Can you speak on that, additional insured, and why is that important?
So who's asking for the additionally insured?
It's usually the property management company that's asking to be added as the additional insured on the homeowner's insurance.
Yeah, that's weird. I just had that come up too. Okay, so the first rule about insurance, and this is any insurance, is that only the insured can file a claim. All right, so that means like if you're the homeowner and it's your property and it gets damaged, you can file the claim for the insurance. Okay, so what the property management is looking for is they wanted to be added as additionally insured. So if something happens, they can file their own claim on your insurance. So, I see this in my world, what it looks like is subcontractors working for a general. The general wants the sub to add them as additionally insured on their insurance, which usually doesn't cost that much to do, which is fine. But what happens is that if the sub, breaks a window or accidentally floods somebody's house, the general contractor can then file on the sub's insurance. So in this situation, what would happen is that if something goes south, the property management would file on the owner's insurance as opposed to filing on their own.
Oh.
So what a property management could do is they could file on their own, and then their insurance would go after the owner's insurance, I guess.
What's the pros and cons of both?
So the pros are for the property management company, because if you don't want to file on your insurance, right, you can make that decision.
Right.
You no longer can make that decision. They get to make it for you.
Okay.
So it's only the pro to the property management company to be able to file on somebody's insurance.
Got it. That's great advice.
In some situations, it's worth it. Like if you have a contractor working on your house, you're going to be added as additionally insured to their insurance, so that if they accidentally, break a window, whatever, that you can file on their insurance.
Okay.
So that it's easier that way. That way, if the sub runs out of town, you can never find them again, which happens sometime. You could still file the insurance claim.
I had to ask that just because, I get that a lot. As a owner of a property management company, we do ask for additional insured, but it's just common in property management. But a lot of times when property management companies ask it, they don't really know why they're asking for it. So I think this is great information for the audience, because it's good to know the reasoning of why. And a lot of homeowners ask that question because they ask, why am I having to do this? What's the reason for it? And then you can't answer that question.
Well, and I think, too, there might come a dispute that did the property management company do something, right? And they can file on the insurance. And don't get me wrong, the insurance companies would figure it out. It also might be just to make it easier on the owner so they don't have to file the claim. The property management company could file the claim and handle it if something did happen.
Got it. So it's like a convenience, the convenience part. Now, let's just say that I have money to invest into, I can purchase homes, or I can do like a commercial lot. In your experience, and now we're talking about risk, right? What would you recommend someone do if, let's say, I can do 3 single-family homes for the same price of a commercial lot, and I'm going to be building. I'm going to be building both. Is the risk the same on both ends, or is one worse than the other?
From my experience, just the building and the end result, commercial would be a way better pick. If you could find the right, not like you have to find the right market though, right? Because home building, it's a little more trickier. Commercial building, it's not as specific and detailed, right? Okay. And then your tenants, I think, are easier on the commercial side.
Well, that for sure. I mean, as a manager, I mean, having a tenant that has a triple net lease,
exactly,
it's way better than, having to go and deal with everything, the roof and there's a sink that's overflowing and all that. But with a triple net lease, it's less stress as a manager.
I agree. And I think you can make more money personally on commercial real estate if you find the right tenant. And right now, it's not office space. You're looking at warehouse space or things like that. It's not, I mean, you can make money on residential realty, but I mean, right now building and the price you're going to build, it's going to be really hard to get a rent that's going to make you any money.
Right now.
Yeah. Just because how high interest rates are, and you're capped at what you can put on a residential property.
You're right. So it'd probably be better to purchase something that's for sale and not do like a build. At this point.
I agree. And building is a stressful process for whoever it is. And if and that I wouldn't start like my first building project's going to be, I'm going to build a brand new house. I mean, let's start with some remodels.
Right.
Let's warm up to the process, because it's not like it should be that you can just turn it over. But I wouldn't recommend that for anybody. Right? You have to be involved. You have to be out there kind of watching it. It has to be that way.
Can't expect things just to happen. You need to inspect, be on the ground.
Even with the best builders, right?
Right.
Even with the best builders. And it takes some time to get used to it, I think. Okay. And just the whole process, especially if you've never dealt with construction, it's its own industry and it works like nothing else.
Right.
Just the way the process goes.
This is 2024, about to end this year in a couple months. Where do you see yourself professionally in 5 years from now?
That's a good question. So my plan is to take my firm nationwide. And so I'm slowly opening offices. So right now we have offices in Los Angeles, New Orleans, Dallas, San Antonio, and Austin. And we're kind of expanding. Every quarter we add a new office that we have in.
Amazing.
And so, when we do that, we do contracts in all 50 states. We do liens and collections in 50 states. And so slowly expanding in that. So, in 5 years, I hope to have at least 15 different offices and, attorneys in those states. I'll have published my 3rd book. So we got big goals.
Big goals and big plans.
Yeah, absolutely.
I see it happening.
Me too.
You do a great service. You save lives, like we talked about earlier. Wealth of knowledge, great communicator. So, I'm very impressed with you, and I thank you for coming on our podcast today. You could be anywhere else with everything you're doing right now, but you stopped your day for us. So I would definitely like to say thank you. And we will always be here for you if you ever need anything from Real Property Management Luxury. And I definitely appreciate you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you. And once again, this is Lindell from High End Homes Handled Right, the Real Property Management Luxury Podcast. Have a great day.